Wir sind hier bei The War Within, der neuen Expansion von World of Warcraft, und wir haben jetzt gleich ein Interview mit den Developern. Ich bin gespannt. Hi everyone, I'm here at Blizzard's booth with developers of The War Within, the new expansion pack for World of Warcraft. May you introduce yourself and what you're doing for the game?
Hello, my name is George Velev. I'm a game producer working on the World of Warcraft team. I produce content like hero talents, the new battleground, Deep Hall Ravine, and just a lot of combat and PvP updates.
And I'm Michael Bybee, production director on World of Warcraft. I rejoined the team last summer, and before that, I worked on Diablo 4. Before that, I shipped Legion, Battle for Azeroth, and Shadowlands.
I'm here to talk with you about, obviously, the new first of the 3 expansions of the World Soul Saga, The War Within. Could you explain shortly what's The War Within about and the main changes player can experience with the new expansion?
Yeah, so at the highest level, the War Within is the beginning of what we call the World Soul Saga, which is this sort of 3-part expansion series that is just beginning at this point. So it's really interesting for us because there's a whole lot of threads of story that have come together to lead us to this moment. And this expansion is the beginning of what we hope will be a very exciting experience for players all along the way. We've done a lot with this expansion to make it so that if you've been a longtime player of World of Warcraft over 20 years, that you have places to connect and get excited. But also if you're a new player, that there's plenty, like it's a beginning of a new story with new characters. And so everybody has something to jump into.
In addition to our normal content like dungeons and raids, we're doing a lot of new stuff like warbands, which is just like a combination of a bunch of features that let you play basically any character you like, but still make it count-wide progression. There's a feature called Delves, which is an extension of open world questing, and you can basically do this bite-sized mini dungeon that scales up and down in difficulty by yourself. And then lastly, there's a feature called Hero Talents, which is sort of like a deeper dive into character progression and lets you sort of pick new talents based off of archetypes from WoW's history.
I heard you developed a new way to make playing solo for players more enjoyable. Maybe you could explain what you did there?
Yeah, I think you're referring to Delves. So Delves are basically, we call them bite-sized mini dungeons. So you can do them solo or with multiple players, although we expect a lot of players to do them solo. And essentially maybe like a 10 to 15 minute long adventure, kind of like a combination of quests and dungeon content that you pick through. They're all themed off of the zone that you're in. So there's some themed off of kobolds. There's some themed off of the spiders in Ashkahet. And the good thing about Delves is they're both scalable. So you can do them, at base difficulty. You can make them harder if you'd like them to make them harder. They offer sort of relevant rewards for people who want to sort of maybe dip their toe into harder content, but still play by themselves. And they also offer some really cool cosmetic options as well.
One of the very exciting new features of the expansions will be the Hero Talents. Could you explain what they do and how they change the gameplay for the players?
Sure, certainly. So Hero Talents are basically an additional talent tree on top of your class and spec trees. The goal of Hero Talents is to basically add a little bit of spice on top of your current gameplay rotation. So for example, there are trees that you basically, if you're playing a Shadow Priest, you summon this massive Void Rift. Or you can, summon Riders of the Apocalypse as a Death Knight. And they're basically self-contained. They're more like packages. So players can basically pick like a flavor package that they want to pick based off things like visuals or gameplay, and basically have that play on top of their existing class or hero or class respect trees, yes.
I am especially interested in the Sunline Blood Death Knight tree and the Demonic Witcher. Could you maybe get a little sneak peek into that too, both?
Sure. Sunlane's a fun one. Sunlane for Blood and Unholy. That was actually one of the easier ones to sort of think about because we were talking about we have to make 39 of these. That's a lot of new concepts, right? And when we got to talking about Death Knight, Sunlane stood out as very much like this makes a lot of sense for Blood. It's Sunlane. It's very sort of vampire oriented. What's more vampire oriented than Blood Death Knight? So that was a good fit. Where we had a bit more of sort of design puzzle was, okay, how can we make this make more sense for Unholy, right? Because Unholy is more about summoning minions. And that's when we added things like summoning Blood Beasts. It's a combination of both. It makes sense for both Blood and Unholy. And honestly, that was probably one of the very first trees we made with Sunlane. That one we felt really good about from the very beginning. And we felt like that just sort of had a very clean runway. Yeah, the Daedalus was a really fun one too, because that was also in a similar boat where it's demonology and destruction. Daedalus is very, very keen on summoning a bunch of demons, which makes a lot of sense for demonology. How we made it work for the other spec, destruction, which is more about very strong spells, was we made all these demons cast these very impactful spells. So it's a kind of combination of both. And actually, I think in terms of visuals, Daedalus is probably up there with like my favorite, because they have this talent where eventually they summon this massive pit lord from like the portals, and it just comes into channels. And I think that's one that we really hit it out of the park.
I play a warlock myself, destruction warlock. The dragon riding skill will be back, and now the first time will be available for all the flying mounts, if I recall correctly. And you did one thing that I will thank you for it. You made flying points accessible for everyone, right? So if you just had one flying point and you didn't have it with your second char, for example, you will have it on your second char, right? What inspired you to do that after 20 years?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So what you're talking about is with the warbands feature. It's interesting because we think about warbands as a collection of a bunch of smaller features that all together they make the game more accessible for you to play alternate characters, right? Having flight points, having access to a bank where you can share items. We're even making it easier to gear up. So I'm going to be playing a demon hunter tank and also probably a healing druid, and being able to actually tank and then get gear for my druid. I'm super, super excited about that, and unlock transmogs and just make it easier to have another character if I want to play that with my friends or however, right? And so it's really focusing on, we know people have been playing this game for 20 years, and there's a lot of people who have alts, and really thinking about like, how can we make this better for those players and make the game better? And so it's piecing together things like that. It's something that we're committing to long term, will be a major part of the game. It's an evergreen feature that we're committing to for the future. And so you can only expect more of that kind of thinking as World of Warcraft evolves.
That was my question. Loot, armor, honor systems. You didn't talk about that. Maybe you can expand on that. There will be a shared honor system, if I recall correctly, between your warbands?
So the renown system, absolutely. So what we've committed to is that in the War Within, your renown is 100% shared across all of the characters on your warband. And that's true for War Within factions, and it's also now players who have been playing in pre-patch, it's true for Dragonflight factions as well. And so it makes it way easier. There's another sort of related feature that if you've done a quest on one of your characters, you can actually choose to have the quest on your alts maybe not show as prominently on the map, and it'll tell you, hey, you've already had a character complete this quest. Maybe you don't need to do this now. And we're going to keep doing stuff like that because it just makes the game easier to play if you've got multiple characters.
That's very cool. I really like that. What have been the challenges during development of the new expansion?
One of the things that's really exciting nowadays in World of Warcraft is that we have more content than we've ever had before. If you look back to Dragonflight, we shipped more patches and more content than ever before in the history of the game. And the goal really was to give players something to look forward to, always. Right around the corner, there's something else coming along. And we're continuing that in the War Within. But in the past, there was sort of a time when we could say like, okay, we've done the last patch and we're going to go off in a corner and finish the expansion, and players don't have as much to do during that time, and then we'll come back and finish it. And so one of the challenges was balancing out how the team can actually work on what's going on in the live game with Mists of Pandaria Remix and Plunderstorm and some of the other live service content that we've done. All the time we're finishing the expansion. And one of the ways that we did that is we had to carve out sort of a separate team that we call the live team that stayed focused on live service, so that we were paying attention to what are players doing today? How are they engaging in the game? Are there things that they want to do that they're not able to do right now? And make sure they had it, while we had a separate expansion team focused on the War Within.
I think something that's maybe a bit more specific is hero talents. There's 39 of these. That's a lot to design and concept to think of. So at the very beginning, we were like, well, we can design these, but like, how can we make sure that we're getting players' feedback along the way? Because we have a very sort of targeted alpha and beta testing, and then the game is live. What can we do to make sure that we're getting his feedback as early as possible? That way, if something is maybe a little bit too crazy, a little bit too out there, can we pivot in time? To sort of combat that, to alleviate that, we decided to send off a bunch of some hero talent blogs where it was just like, all right, here's a picture of all the tooltips. What do you think? Is this cool? And that actually was very helpful, because we took a lot of very large swings early on with some of the designs that were maybe a little bit too outlandish, too crazy, and that let us get community feedback and let us align to make sure that, hey, the hero talents that we're making are what the players want. So I think that's sort of how we navigate like something that's as complex as hero talents, just making sure that the community is sort of along the ride for the whole time.
Who is your favorite character in the new expansion?
I want to start with this one. So I think Illyria is actually one of the coolest characters in the expansion. Partly because she's been around for a long time. She has a long history with the Warcraft 2 is when she was actually like a major part of that story. And she's been around. She was in Legion when she became sort of the leader of the Void Elves. And now she's back in a really, really big way. She's also Sylvanas' sister. And there's a lot of tension between those two and a lot of history with, they started out, both of them, trying to defend the elves. And so many things have changed since then. They've gone totally different places. And Illyria is struggling with that and her relationship with Turalian and her son Eritor, who was raised entirely without her. There's a lot going on there, and all of those things are things we're going to explore in this expansion. And so I think that's super fascinating. I'm excited to see where we go, and I really think players are going to get pumped about that.
I'm rooting for Xalatath personally. I know it's kind of weird, but like, I don't know, I always think it's interesting to sort of like see where the villains come from and how they progress, and knowing that like, yeah, Xalatath existed as a legendary weapon back for Shadow Priest and Legion, and knowing that, she's been in the background causing all sorts of chaos for however many years now, I think is really interesting. And I just like rooting for, the bad guy. So that's me.
As long as she doesn't burn the Teldrassil tree again, I'm fine with that. That won't hurt me right in my feels. How does the new expansion affect the combat system? Any new game changes, features that change the fight drastically?
Speaking for things like classes, I think one thing that we're hoping to get out of hero talents is sort of an extension of current spec and class gameplay. So we're hoping that, as players level from, 71 to 80, they're picking up hero talents and getting sort of, augmented along the way. And once they sort of dip their toes into content like delves or dungeons or raids, they feel like they have the agency to pick between, one hero talent versus the other. We just want to make sure they're feeling balanced, they're feeling approachable. We know that tuning matters for a lot of people. For a lot of people, tuning is all they really care about. So we're taking a lot of, time to make sure that as we're building these out, we're giving ourselves opportunities to make sure that they're, as balanced as they can be. One thing that we do have in our sort of disposal is these are not very similar to the current talent trees where you can pick and choose what you have. They're more like tuning packages is what we call them. So we know that if you're playing a Diabolus Warlock, you're going to have this talent or the other talent. So if Diabolus Warlock is very weak or very powerful, we can just, nudge that talent up and down and give us more direct access to sort of hero talents. So that's one thing that we're doing. And we're hoping players sort of, accept that and are happy with that.
Can you tell us more about the late game activities in the War Within, like dungeons, raids? I think you mentioned before maybe the first big raid that comes in September?
Yeah, we're doing a raid, surprising no one. It's going to be a really interesting experience. You basically travel through, this like massive kingdom within the Rubians, and it eventually leads into sort of this awesome fight with Queen Ansarek. There has been a lot of details shared about Queen Ansarek fight, intentionally so. Want to make sure it's sort of like a secret, and when players get to it on live, it's sort of like, a nice reveal. But it's going to be really fun. I think there's some interesting things players can expect. One thing that we're also trying to support this time around is for players who don't want to sort of, do all the raid content, but they also want to experience the story. We have a feature called Story Mode. And that basically is you go into the raid and you fight the last boss. And it's sort of a more, simple experience. It's more streamlined. It's there for players who want to just experience the narrative. And there are still rewards that you get from doing it. But it's really for the players who want to just make sure they're experiencing all the storyline content without having to sort of maybe find groups to do it. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, how about we talk about Mythic Plus as another in-game system. One of the big changes that we're doing this time is we've actually changed the way the affixes work. So in Mythic Plus Dungeons this time, you're going to start out with, there's 4 affixes that are themed after Xalatath that sort of introduce gameplay changes from Keystones 2 to 11. And then beyond that, we actually changed the affixes again so that players who are pushing high-end keys actually don't have to worry about the dungeons varying, and they can push and push and push, and they have a consistent dungeon experience. And then we restructured the way Mythic Plus Dungeons work so that before all those keys, if you're not somebody who likes timed dungeons, if that feels like a lot of pressure, then you actually have a lot of options now to sort of, hey, I'm going to do a Mythic 0. There's no timer. It's still challenging content, but it's not maybe quite as hard as some of those higher end keys, and I can get really incredible loot from it. It used to be that those would lock out once. You could only do that once per week, and we're changing it now so you can do it every day if that's exactly.
In what way will the War Within be linked with the other 2 upcoming expansions from the World Soul Saga?
Yeah, so the biggest overriding thing is the story and the characters. So the War Within is the beginning of the chapter. And so we're introducing Xalatath as a primary villain, and we're bringing back Thrall and Illyria, who I mentioned earlier. And there's some new characters. Dagran is the son of Moira Thurisian, and he's sort of a dark iron, like he was a dwarf that was born to, a dwarf who had married a dark iron dwarf, and so he has this heritage of multiple dwarven families, and he's also going to go along for the ride, and you get to introduce to him as a character. And so we're sort of setting up in a big way all of these new characters, plus bringing back some old characters, and getting the story sort of supercharged. And then when we go into Midnight, which is the next expansion after this, and the Last Titan in the following, we're going to pay off those character stories. We've already mentioned that in Midnight we're going to the home of the elves, Quel'Thalas, and so Illyria is actually going to get to explore some of her family story a little bit more deeply, and you'll get to see like what is actually happening out there that maybe Xalatath is looking for. And then we'll pay it all off in the Last Titan. And obviously we don't want to spoil all of those stories, but the thing that's really exciting is all of this is being built together at the same time. So we know where things are going, and we can kind of seed those player stories along the way. So people who are jumping in right now can know that we're going to pay that off in a big way.
Totally forgot to ask you about the new race there is. The Earthens. In German it's Irdene. I think it's Earthens in English.
Yeah, so the Earthen are essentially in the long ago history of Azeroth, the Titans created beings to help them manage the planet. And the Earthen were some of these. But it's been so long and the Titans are gone now that they've actually lost connection with who they were at the beginning. And so what's really interesting about this expansion is you actually get to be introduced to the Earthen culture. You get to see how they're grappling with that. Some of the Earthen are following the Titans' edicts, and that's the rules, and they're doing it. While some of them have decided, no, I don't want that. I'm going to find my own life. They move out into sort of the countryside, and still others have started to dabble with magic and do some other things. And you get introduced to these Earthen along the way when you're doing the questing experience. And then once you get to max level, you have the opportunity to do a storyline to unlock Earthen as a playable race. And you can sort of choose what kind of Earthen you want to make. And we've added all sorts of interesting customizations. I think one of the most unique is that you can choose gems encrusted on your Earthen body and then change the color of them. It's actually going to be a really fun race, I think. I'm planning to play one myself.
And they have great beards.
Wow. Yeah, I think my final last question would be, how do you celebrate a new pack, a new expansion that's going out? Do you sit together with your colleagues watching the player numbers go up, or do you crack a beer, or how would you imagine celebrating the new expansion?
I think it really depends on the person. For me, well, this time around it's going to be, midnight, so I'm going to be staying up and just trying to log on to World of Warcraft on my laptop for sure. But back when we were in the office, a lot of us are playing the game. A lot of us are checking out like forums, seeing how things are going, watching streams. It's definitely a huge event, and it's something that we need to be part of because sometimes things pop up and we need to be present and working. I think one thing that we do a lot as a team, though, is when there's things like MDI or the Race of World First. Like when you walk around the office, everyone has it on their monitor, on the second monitor. No work gets done, but everyone's just watching. It's a great time.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. The thing that you can expect from the team today when the War Within launches is that everybody's going to be jumping in and playing alongside people. We do that very much. It's a huge part of how we go. As long as we're not fixing issues that are popping up, the team is playing alongside everybody else because, this is a game we all love. We love going through that experience, and it's a passion. It's a huge part of who we all are.
Thank you very much. That was the interview. I hope you guys liked it. I myself would thank you because I'm a huge fan of your franchise and long fan. Thank you very much for your time.
Happy to be here.
Das war das Interview. Ich hoffe, euch hat es genauso gefallen wie mir. Es waren ja einige spannende Eindrücke. Falls ihr noch mehr sehen wollt, dann klickt mal hier irgendwo, sind weitere Videos von uns verlinkt. Ansonsten, ja, wenn es euch gefallen hat, lasst einen Daumen da, abonniert den Kanal, ihr wisst, was ihr zu tun habt. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!